Okay, we'll start in a few minutes. I'm still waiting for the university to set up the online course. So it will be online and you should have access to it on my UPEI.ca. And also the Moodle should be up as well. It should not take that much longer. I've been in touch with IT services, so hopefully it will be done this week. And then when it's done, I'll upload everything online. So I will upload the course outline and the readings and the assignments. Um, and I will post any announcements there. So normally we will meet every Tuesday and Thursday, and it's 2:30 to 3:45 p.m. Prince Edward Island time. So I'll just wait a couple of more minutes before we start. And this will just be the introductory meeting. And I will also post a recorded lecture online this week. But normally the class will be synchronous. So we will be meeting Tuesday and Thursday from 2:30 to 3:45. Okay, so we'll start. I will show you the course outline. Everything will also be posted online. Sorry that the course is not available yet online. It should be ready soon. The actual course module should appear. So I will show you the outline, and we can go through it and talk about what the expectations are in terms of reading. So the first week is this class, January 9th, and the reading is by Emia Srinivasan, who is a professor at Oxford University, and the reading is about genealogy, epistemology, and world making. So I will discuss the article briefly today, and then I will also post a recorded lecture online about this article, which is about the idea of genealogy. The second class will be about Giorgio Agamben's work, and it will move us from thinking about genealogy, which is about origins of the self, and the relationship between our origins and the societies in which we live. Then we will move to discuss politics, and we'll talk about the ways that one's sense of self is grounded in a political reality. Then we'll talk about Marxism. So David McNally is a Marxist scholar, and this article is about class and capitalism. So we will talk about the ways that the self, as a reflection of and also as a product of society, is determined by class relations and by power structures that are determined by class. Then we'll discuss Patricia Hill Collins' readings. And Patricia Hill Collins is a foundational thinker in Black feminist thoughts. And Hill Collins has written a book called Black feminist thought, which is a widely cited text. So we'll look at the ways that race and the construction of hierarchies due to race and due to the construction of hierarchies that are grounded in a belief in ethnic and racial difference form constructions of the self today. And specifically, Hill Collins is interested in the ways that Black feminism is grounded or rooted in the lived experiences of Black women and histories of the transatlantic slave trade. And Hill Collins is specifically interested in how histories of the transatlantic slave trade are always gendered. So we'll look at this article, and it's just one article from a larger body of scholarship that is widely cited in our time period, particularly because of contemporary social movements. Then we will discuss this article, which is written by a group of authors, and it is about queer temporalities. So we'll specifically look at queer theory. And one of the concepts from queer theory that is often discussed in contemporary academic scholarship is the idea of time and temporality. So we will talk about the ways that our understandings of ourselves are really about time, and the ways that we use time, what time period we see ourselves in, and the ways that our lives and life courses unfold is really a question of time. And queer theorists are often interested in the ways that ideas of heteronormativity and gender shape how much time we think we have to do certain things, and also shape the ways that our lives can take certain trajectories. And queer theorists are often interested in looking at the ways that people can take different paths in life, which can be enjoyable and which can also open up new ways of living. So then we'll talk about Jack Halberstam's work on transgender bodies and transgender lives. And we'll look at the ways that gender shapes our understandings of the self. So then we'll talk about Sandra Harding's work. And Sandra Harding is a well-cited scholar and one of the foundational thinkers, I think, in standpoint theory. And specifically, Harding was interested in looking at the ways that ideas of positivism or objective and rational truth can be challenged if we think about lived experiences. So Harding's intervention into academic scholarship, specifically canons of European and Western thought, was to ask us to consider how truth looks very different from a feminist perspective. So Harding is interested in asking us to consider the ways that sexism and gender roles really shape our perception of reality. So then we'll look at Harding's work again for these 2 weeks. And in February, we'll look at Teresa de L'Ortiz. And Teresa de L'Ortiz's writing has often been about race and colonialism. So in this essay, the author discusses Frantz Fanon's text, Black Skin, White Masks. So we'll talk about post-colonialism. Then we'll discuss Julia Kristeva's work, and Julia Kristeva is interested in psychoanalysis. So as a discipline, what psychoanalysis asks us to consider is how ourselves are not just formed through things that have happened today or things that we can actually know or feel, but we often have unrealized aspirations or anxieties or an unconscious mind that shapes our sense of self. So then we will look at Indigenous issues, and we'll specifically look at Joyce Green's writings about identity formation and the politics of settler Canada. And then we will talk about who is Indigenous and the ways that the making of Indigenous identities, or who gets to decide who can call themselves Indigenous, is really a highly contested set of ideas that leads one to think about the history of settler colonialism in Canada. So then we have Reading Week, and we'll watch a film after Reading Week. And then we will discuss Shireen Razak's work. And Dr. Shireen Razak has produced a tremendous amount of scholarship about the treatment of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, and also about Canadian law. So we will look at this essay, which is about the murder of Cindy Gladue in Canada. Then we will discuss Catherine Morton's work, and Catherine Morton has written about images and the ways that representations of Indigenous women and girls in Canadian media often shape public perception of trauma and victimization. So the last month of the class, we will talk about this book that I've written called Uncommitted Crimes, which I'll post online. And so this is a book about artists, and it's about political artists. And I guess the book asks you to consider the ways that artists use artistic work to comment on politics, but to also create a space between oneself and society. So that is the course. I hope it's interesting. We spend a few weeks on some ideas, particularly standpoint epistemology, but most weeks we will talk about new topics every week. So in terms of the assignments, there will be a take-home test that I will post online on January 23rd, and then it will be due on January 25th. Then there will be a presentation that is due on the 27th of February after Reading Week. So you can submit the presentation online, and it will be a recorded presentation. And then there will be a final assignment due at the very end of class, and it will be a written assignment, but you will have a lot of choices as to what you do for the assignment at the end of class. And you will also be asked to submit a mark for attendance and participation. And you will be asked to give yourself a mark out of 10. So all of this will be available online. The assignment guidelines will be posted online. And as soon as the course is on UPEI.ca, I will post the materials. So that's all. So the three elements then you'll be tested on will be the take-home test, and then the presentation, and then the final assignment. So in terms of the take home, which is the first thing that you have to submit for marks, you'll be asked to define concepts from the reading. So if you were to look at this reading for this week, you might be asked to define genealogy. And I will also define the concept in my lectures. So you can cite the lectures or the readings. You might also be asked to define Black feminist thought, and you can cite the lecture, you can cite the lecture on January 18th or the readings. So the test will cover all of these weeks from January 9th to January 23rd. So the last reading will be queer temporalities, and then the take-home test will be handed out, and then it will be due on the 25th. So the presentation guidelines are outlined in the assignment sheet, which I'll post online, but I will just tell you now that it is a 10 to 15-minute presentation on some aspect of the reading. So you are asked to choose one of the week's readings and to construct a presentation about this reading. And the one thing that you are asked not to do is to summarize. So I would avoid summarizing the author extensively. It is a 10-minute presentation, so you might want to discuss what the article is in, say, 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then the rest of the presentation should offer an original thesis and argument that relates to some aspect of the course reading. So I hope that is clear. Do you have questions about the assignments or the class? The biggest issue now, I think, is just the online elements, and hopefully everything will be sorted out by next week. So for this class then, you can also use this chat function if you have any questions for this introductory class. So I will give an introductory lecture then about Amya Srinivasan's article regarding genealogy. So this week's article asks you to consider the question of genealogy, and genealogy is about origins, and a kind of textbook definition of genealogy is this: an account of the descent of a person, family, or group from an ancestor or from older forms. Regular descent of a person, family, or group of organisms from a progenitor or older form. Pedigree. Study of family ancestral lines, an account of the origin and historical development of something genealogical. So genealogy is often used to discuss origins in terms of a person's family or their history. And genealogy can also be used to discuss the origins of thought and how we form certain thoughts and certain claims to truth. Genealogy is a highly contested term politically and historically. Amya Srinivasan discusses Nazis at one point for a few sentences in the essay. So the idea of origins in pure blood is obviously a really disturbing idea. The search for genealogy for origins can be quite problematic. At the same time, the author is interested in how we come to make certain claims. Why do we assume certain things? Why do we form certain patterns of thought or behavior? And our personal history, our ancestral history, our religious beliefs, our families, and of course our class origin and our national origin can help us form certain beliefs. But the author is interested in genealogical anxiety and anxiety over origins and anxiety over this idea of pure thought or thoughts and ideas that are naturally connected to one's origins. So I think the ultimate point or the ultimate argument that I understood or garnered from reading the essay, and I think is important to consider, is to think about the ways that we can shape our own thoughts and our own realities, and we are not bound by genealogies, so that one's family upbringing, their history, their class position do not necessarily shape or determine future thinking or future action. I mean, we are rational actors who can choose to read new texts and be influenced by new ideas and choose to move forward in ways that our ancestors did not. And Emmy Srinivasan cites Nietzsche and also cites Catherine McKinnon, who is a legal feminist scholar. So the ways that our ancestors might have thought about gender or sexuality or rape obviously change over time, and we have the choice to read new texts, be exposed to new ideas, and move forward in ways that are not similar to the past. So this is one of the things that I thought was really exciting about the article, and it comes to the end of the essay where Srinivasan discusses world making and the new worlds and new friendships we can form and new ideas that we can have that often represent a break from the past. So this is a clip of Emmy Srinivasan.
How are you?
The artist.
Well, I guess I say that I'm sick. Just to explain that I don't always sound quite this nasal. I mean, I'm fairly nasal, but I think it's exaggerated because I have like the flu. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'd just like to keep going on the thread that we were talking about before we said hi to each other. I'm just so grateful that you wanted to talk with me because I've been a big fan of your work since 2018. And, you know, I love that your book came out in 2021. Is that the case, 2021?
That is right, yeah.
And I think I just want to sort of just take a moment so that I can get a sense of who you are and where you come from, because I'm so interested always in people who find themselves in philosophy. It's
right.
Just a strange part of the park. I never studied philosophy, but I have a weird enthusiasm for it. So, and so can you just tell me how you found yourself in this part of the park? Like,
sure.
What led you there?
I mean, I think it's funny that, I mean, it's amazing to me that you've never formally studied it, because you have obviously not just an enthusiasm for it, which is a great early modern notion, but, you know, a real facility for it. I mean, I love reading you write about philosophy. And in particular, I love, do I have it here? Yeah, so this, I'll answer your question in a second, but I really love this book you published.
Oh,
good. Maybe we'll get to talk about that, about Tominaga Nakamoto, the Japanese philosopher, about whom I knew very little before reading this. So how did I find myself in philosophy? Well, so, I mean, in terms of family heritage, I'm from India, but I grew up all over. So I was born in the Middle East, in Bahrain, and then moved to Taiwan, Singapore, New York, London. And so we were moving around every 3 or 4 years. And I think because of that experience, I was very, very aware, in quite a practical way, of the way in which people's worldviews, languages, concepts, values, just varied quite radically depending on the specifics of family and culture and language, history. And I think as a child, I sort of yearned for a universal language. I wanted to do this thing of standing outside of the relationship between mind and world and look at it from the outside. And it felt like philosophy was that discipline that aspired to do that thing of standing outside of the relationship of mind to world. But of course, what you discover is that philosophy can't give you that, right? That's the irony, is that, it aspires constitutively to reflect on the relationship of mind to world, but the only tool with which you have to do that is the mind itself. And so it becomes this endlessly kind of iterative, self-reflective practice, but it's a way for me of kind of meditating on the problem of that.
Do you remember that feeling of wanting that? Like, do you remember what age you were? I don't want to pry. Yeah, is that something you remember?
Yeah, I remember, it accompanies my very earliest memories. So my earliest memories, and I'm sure this was because I was raised in a sort of vaguely Hindu household. We weren't particularly religious, but there was some sense of, there was a kind of structuring Hindu metaphysics, I guess, in the way I was raised. I just thought that the world was an illusion. I just didn't have what some contemporary modern, Anglophone philosophers called, the common Western metaphysic, where you just have objects and human bodies and persons, and that's obviously reality. I just kind of thought, well, this is illusion, this is the Sanskrit word Maya, and reality is something more fundamental, is deeper than that. Absolutely. And that was my starting point. And so I was always troubled by what it meant to move around the world as an embodied being, interacting with other embodied beings and other material beings, while also believing or knowing that there was a more kind of fundamental reality, that what didn't involve this kind of separation and this confinement to bodies and objects.
But it's interesting, it's that those intuitions and feelings you had about this led you to study philosophy. People can have those thoughts and then they become an accountant.
Or they become an artist.
Oh yeah, they can be anyone, but you followed those intuitions into that domain. So how
how did that? So I think I was just lucky with teachers. So when I was in, this is a cliched thing to say, but when I think about how I ended up where I am, the role of different teachers from a very young age just cannot be overstated. And I feel extremely lucky to have been touched by particular teachers. So I had one very formative teacher when I was in my last couple of years of school. It was an English teacher, but he gave me a lot of philosophy to read. And I remember reading Kant with him, and I remember reading Plato with him. And then I went and read more of that stuff when I was in college at Yale. And I just kept on going back to it. It wasn't that I thought I was going to be an academic. I really didn't, or certainly not an academic philosopher. And I was really fascinated by art history and English and political theory and all of these other disciplines. But somehow there was just the pull of philosophy and these philosophical texts and problems.
You're so right about the people as sort of way stations for intellectual life. I can definitely empathize with that, and it actually reminds me of what you wrote about in your piece on genealogical anxiety, when you describe genealogical luck. when you were
Right.
talking about your teacher. That's exactly what I mean. Oh, that's genealogical luck. I think in a way, I don't know, it just reminded me of that. But yeah, I understand that completely.
What's your origin story? We're both very interested in these questions of origins and luckiness and fatedness.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I feel like I found in you a fellow alien that's been marooned on Earth, and we're trying to make the best of it, basically. um, my story is I immigrated from Hong Kong to the Midwest,
Right.
and as I was
You grew up
growing
in Omaha.
yeah, and I think growing up, I had the same questions that any sort of preteen had, like, so just basic questions, yeah, will I succeed? Will I die? Am I handsome? Will anyone love me? Just basic questions. And I think I thought I could find the answers in self-help books, but
Ah,
but in the local bookstore in Omaha, the self-help section was right next to the philosophy section, as sometimes bookstores do.
right, right.
But
Sometimes the philosophy section is just a self-help section.
yeah. I think that's the implication. It's like, here are the serious books, the self. But if this isn't serious enough, maybe you can read these too. But it's the same class. And I think I went to the wrong shelf. I should have gotten a self-help book, but I ended up with a philosophy book. And I remember the book. It's The Story of Philosophy by Will Durant. And
Huh.
and that was, and I have never looked back since. I've been poisoned ever since. And it's interesting thinking back. I found my copy of The Story of Philosophy years ago, and I noticed what I underlined. And it's interesting how it shaped. I mean, talk about teachers shaping us, because I got the sense from my old copy that the people that I enjoyed reading later on were the people that Durant wrote sort of more open-heartedly about. So he loved Kant. So in a way, I loved Kant. He didn't have feelings for Nietzsche. So I
Right.
didn't have feelings for Nietzsche.
Right.
For very long. It's so interesting seeing that. But in a way, I think those basic questions that you had when you were young, I didn't have those kinds, but I had similar basic questions. And I thought for some reason philosophy would help me illuminate them. And I think you're right, they don't really. But I've ended up to a point where it's just fun. Like, I like reading men and women who think that they can figure it all out. It's the great drama and comedy of it is just, there's nothing better, it seems to me. I mean, is that true? I don't know, but that might be an exaggeration, but I think you catch my drift, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I like the idea. I like the idea that you were looking for a self-help book and accidentally got to the philosophy section, because the philosophy, or at least an area, a period of philosophy that you and I are both kind of obsessed with, the ancient Greek tradition, really just didn't see a distinction between those two categories. And it's only philosophy since really, the late 19th century. I mean, arguably with Kant a bit earlier, where we start to see philosophy as just this like purely theoretical enterprise that isn't supposed to be like deeply entangled with questions about how we as individual people ought to live.
Stop it there. And when I post the slides online, you'll have access to the whole talk, so you can watch the entire talk. And for the rest of the class today, I will discuss the article which is on the syllabus, which is about genealogical anxiety. So Srinivasan, who is a professor at Oxford University, has written this article, and so in September 2019, Amia Srinivasan was announced as the next Chitchell Professor of Social and Political Theory at All Souls College, Oxford. She took up the appointment on January 1st, 2020. She is the first woman and the first person of color to occupy this position. So this article then was recently written, and Amia Srinivasan writes, I recently encountered a term for a syndrome that has bugged me since childhood, genealogical anxiety. The phrase was coined by up-and-coming Oxford philosopher Amia Srinivasan in an unpublished paper on genealogy. And this is a review of the essay that is on your syllabus. So the paper stems from her book in progress, The Contingent World, Genealogy, Epistemology, Politics. So by genealogical anxiety, what the author means is the doubt that afflicts you or should afflict you when you contemplate the genesis of your beliefs, especially moral and political beliefs. Why are you a Muslim progressive, Buddhist, libertarian, atheist, anarchist, Christian, white supremacist? So Amia Srinivasan is interested in this kind of anxiety that the author thinks should afflict us all, that we should not simply have beliefs, but we should question why we have these beliefs. Why do we believe in God, or why don't we believe in God? Why do we have certain political beliefs? Why do we have certain preferences that allow us to then make certain choices? So John Horgan reviewed the essay in the Scientific American, and Horgan states, am I justified in having the beliefs, values, and concepts I do? And this is a quote directly from the article. And Srinivasan asks, if you have them only because of my particular contingent history. So what the author is then asking is a really interesting question in our time period, particularly due to the rise of identity politics, and I think due to the ways that one's origins often lead to certain political and religious beliefs that then lead to political action. And what the author is asking is whether people are justified in having these beliefs, values, and concepts if the reason they have them is because of their history. So if you have a certain conservative upbringing, are you justified in then having these beliefs and values because of your history? Even if laws change and there's a passage of, say, new rights for transgender people and for queer people, are you justified in having beliefs in what queer theorists and feminist theorists would call cisnormativity because of your history, because you might have grown up in a conservative household or a religious family? One can obviously have beliefs and values without violating the law, but the author is just asking these questions like whether it is justified to have these beliefs, values, and concepts only because of a particular contingent history. So your response, writes Horgan, might be that most people's beliefs are arbitrary and erroneous, but you were lucky. You happen to have been born and raised under circumstances that fostered true beliefs in, for example, Western-style democracy and free market capitalism. But Srinivasan notes that to think of oneself as, quote, genealogically lucky and others as genealogically unlucky seems to open oneself to accusations of chauvinism, narcissism, and immodesty. So that if you think that you are lucky that you grew up in this conservative, heterosexual, say, Christian household, then I think there is this sense of immodesty. What I would also say is that the law has changed. And so people might question why they have certain beliefs that do not correspond to contemporary laws. However, people could move ahead with these beliefs and try to change laws. And when we get to standpoint epistemology, I'll discuss abortion debates in the United States of America and efforts to change laws that once supported pro-choice movements and the right to choice. So I guess I would argue that one is not justified in having certain beliefs and values and concepts because of their particular history, because the law changes and one's personal beliefs could, I suppose, remain the same, but in order to participate in society as it changes, I think that one should challenge their beliefs in order to participate in a law-abiding society. And I think also one is not necessarily justified in having beliefs that are rooted in history without questioning that history. So if one grew up in, say, a conservative, patriarchal, religious family, one could question how that family was formed, and if that family was formed because of choice or because of the economic power that men had in certain time periods over women. So I think it's important to question our beliefs and to not just think that we had a really good upbringing and therefore we have certain beliefs. However, there are others who would argue that one's personal beliefs can remain rooted in their personal history and particularly family upbringing and religious upbringing. So Horgan goes on to state that genealogical anxiety can liberate you. It can give you a sense of vast possibility. You can create, choose, act upon new beliefs. One's more likely to give you a sense of meaning, maybe even a little joy. Srinivasan calls this act of creation world making. At its best, she says, world making is a radical endeavor, bringing into existence worlds we scarcely thought possible. So this idea of world making then is the point, I think, of genealogical anxiety, that you can be liberated from indoctrination or influence at a young age, and you can have new influences over the course of your life. So if you were to think about growing up in a family, many people will have influences of friends, teachers, scenes, political movements, girlfriends, boyfriends, partners, and this will obviously shape your new sense of world making. I would also argue that, again, the law, I think, is central to the ways that we move from having a really rooted set of ideas in our origins and in our families or in our religious upbringings to having a new sensibility that allows us to participate fully in society. So world making, I think, can also be about our entry into a society of new and changing laws. So if we were to open up our very limited understanding, say, of gender, and we were to accept and embrace the passage of C-16, which is comprehensive federal Canadian law that protects transgender people's rights and protects the rights of people who want to express gender in different ways, then this would perhaps lead us to the creation of a new world, in the sense that we would allow new people to be part of our world. And I think that societies are always engaged in world making, and the law is a good example of the ways that societies kind of ask us to open up our minds and create new worlds. So settler colonial history is not the only influence on Canadian law now. We have new Canadian laws, new Canadian ideas that change the ways that a country operates and ask us to be open to possibility. So Anya Srinivasan writes, we all have, or sorry, this is from the article by John Horgan in Scientific American. We all have the freedom to transcend our genealogy, to choose who we want to be. And I think that this kind of freedom is really important to consider. There are critiques of this strain of thinking or writing in the liberal arts and humanities, and particularly philosophy as a discipline is not a unified discipline. So I would ask you to consider this idea of freedom as we go on and talk about Marxism and class antagonism, and the ways that poverty can often define how thoughts are formed, and how ideology is formed, so that we have the freedom to transcend our genealogy, to choose who we want to be. But Marxists are often considered in the material ways that our everyday work life, our everyday class position, our housing conditions can limit this kind of freedom. So this is another clip. I mean, it's Srinivas.
With Tyler is produced by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, bridging
This is about utopian feminism, and the article also cites Catherine McKinnon, who is a legal feminist scholar. So Amy Srinivasan's work also often touches on gender and feminism. And Srinivasan also wrote a book called The Right to Sex, about the involuntary celibate movement.
between academic ideas and real-world problems. Learn more at mercatus.org. And for more conversations, including videos, transcripts, and upcoming dates, visit conversationswithtyler.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Conversations with Tyler. Today, I'm here chatting with Amiya Srinivasan, who has rapidly become one of the best and best-known philosophers. She's a professor at Oxford University. She has a new book out, which has made bestseller lists everywhere, called The Right to Sex. It has been one of the huge, big hit books of the year. Amiya, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Tyler. I'm really pleased to be here.
Now, you've described yourself as a utopian feminist. So in your vision of utopian feminism, how much room is there for what I would call compartmentalization? So just to give a simple example, if you look at, say, stand-up comedy, a lot of it is sexist or racist, or even if it's not, it's perceived as such. What happens to that in the utopia? Do we just compartmentalize and let it continue? Or how do you treat it?
I'm not sure about room for compartmentalization. I do think there's a lot of room for context. So, for example, when you're thinking about the violence in rap lyrics, right? An obsession that began in the kind of conservative pearl-clutching right in the 80s. You've got to think about what those invocations of violence are doing performatively in a piece of art that is rap music. And it's not the same thing as someone standing up in the middle of the town square, trying to deliberately incite violence against people, right? So I think, not even speaking about the utopia, just speaking about, how we should think about performative utterances right now, I think we need to address them with a great deal of contextual sensitivity and think about,
in general, what is happening in these particular cases, right? So what seems to be problematic might not be, but then let's be honest, like if you've spent any time in a comedy club, and I recently did that when I was last in LA, I mean, there is just a lot of quite naked sexism there. It's pretty shocking, despite the fact of this kind of feminist revolution in comedy, just how much stand-up comedy is just really quite comedically boring and sexist. Now, there's this question about, I take it that one of the thoughts you have is something like humor.
Right, which is a brutal element to it. How humor fits into utopia is a long-standing puzzle, because humor is often brutal, right?
Look, I don't think the utopia or the kind of post-revolutionary world is a place without any form of brutality, and it's certainly not a place without humor. It's going to have disappointment and heartache and tragedy and tragicomedy. Human foibles will still exist. Heartbreak will exist. And so with all of those things, you have humor. I mean, what I think is very limited is the thought, I'm not suggesting that you're advocating for this thought, which is that what you basically need structures of organized political oppression like racism to have humor. I mean, the Greeks had humor without having racism, right? They had other systems of domination, but they had a great and an advanced set of humor, often directed at intellectuals and philosophers who I think are often very much a worthy target. I think there can be this view on which ending forms of domination and oppression somehow drains life of all that is special and textured about it: humor, love, intimacy, friendship. I just don't think that's true. I think, in fact, what the end of domination would do is release us more fully into the specific things that make human life worth living, including humor.
Now, there's an interview with you where you described your own work and book, and I quote, as discomfort, ambivalence, and truth-telling. I thought that was a good take, but I suppose my thought is this: if you're always carving out space for context and ambivalence, is there some path along which you end up in a kind of social conservatism, admittedly a feminist social conservatism? But let me ask, like, what parameter values would have to be different for you to end up as mostly a social conservative? You don't have to think that the values are that way, but what does that counterfactual look like?
Where I am Yes Srinivasan and I'm a social conservative.
You end up as a social conservative because there's always context, there's always ambivalence. You're carving out these spaces with multiple perspectives, right? Building these worlds. And sort of without intending it, you create all these spaces where there's plenty of room for social conservatism, which is then respected and intact.
So, I mean, I should say that while I'm ambivalent about some things, I am very adamant about some other things in the book, right? So it's not that my general take is one where we should be ambivalent about every question, or we feel like we can't come down on certain sides. So, for example, I have very strong, and I think, within the American mainstream, very controversial views about the decriminalization of sex work, for example. I think there's a very clear case grounded in basic political considerations and ethical considerations for why we should decriminalize sex work totally. But I do think there are other cases, for example, where we're thinking about how to deal with sexually abusive men, or the relationship between radical politics and state power, where we have to be more circumspect and ambivalent, right? And so I don't want to say that my general kind of political outlook is one of ambivalence. So what's the closest path counterfactually, right? Is that the question between me and sort of like a conservative worldview? I mean, I can tell you the parts of conservatism that are sort of most attractive to me.
But to get you sort of all the way there, like someone might say, well, if the costs of single parent families were much higher than I thought, I would be a social conservative. I'm not saying that has to be your answer, but that would be a kind of answer to the question.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I'm going to give a very good answer to it. I think there are interesting questions about the place of community, tradition, ritual, continuity in human life and their relationship to value. And I think conservatives, in the true sense of conservatives, are sometimes correctly criticize the left for not paying enough attention to some of those things that really do give human life value. And there's a question about how you make room for those things in a society that's also radically democratic and plural. I think liberalism's answer hasn't been a hugely successful one. And so the left has to offer an alternative, right? An alternative vision on which you can have real community, affinity, certain forms of collective ritual tradition, but in ways that aren't oppressive. And I suppose that my closest path to conservatism would be, if I were the kind of person, which I'm not, who just thinks that actually the only plausible model for those things is a kind of non-secular, broadly speaking, religious, but also culturally and ethnically insular vision of community. I in no way endorse that, but I think that I have, and we on the left generally, I'm not including you, people who are on the left generally, do have more time for that part of the conservative critique than just sort of liberals who think that, well, no, you can just have a basic pluralistic society in which everyone is within certain constraints able to live their vision of the good life, so long as it doesn't impinge on anyone else's ability to do the same, and that's totally workable. I think that vision has left us in a place of mass alienation, unhappiness, and a certain kind of spiritual vacuity. And you can have that starting point and go in very different ways, and you can go very right wing from that starting point. That's just not the way I go.
Okay, so I'll stop there. Again, when I post the slides, you'll have access to the whole clip if you have time to watch it. So Srinivasan writes, we suffer from genealogical anxiety when we worry that the contingent origins of our representations once revealed will somehow undermine or cast doubt on those representations. Is such anxiety ever rational? Many have apparently thought so, from pre-Socratic critics of Greek theology to contemporary evolutionary debunkers of morality. One strategy for vindicating critical genealogies is to see them as undermining the epistemic standing of our representations, the justification of our beliefs, the aptness of our concepts, and so on. I argue that this strategy is not as promising as it might first seem. So, epistemology is the study of knowledge. It is how we know things. And so the author then states one strategy for vindicating critical genealogies is to see them as undermining the epistemic standing of our representations, the justification of our beliefs, the aptness of our concepts, and so on. So what the article is really asking us to consider is how we form certain truths and ideas, and what are the grounds on which we can claim to know certain things to be true. And can we call these truths into question, particularly in relation to the origins of these thoughts and the origins of our upbringings, our national or cultural or religious backgrounds? So Srinivasan goes on to write, instead, I suggest that critical genealogies can wield a sort of meta-epistemic power. Insofar as we wish to resist the genealogical critique, we are under pressure to see ourselves as the beneficiaries of a certain kind of good luck, what I call genealogical luck. But there is also a resolutely non-epistemic way of understanding the power of critical genealogies, one that is essential, I argue, for understanding the genealogical projects of various theorists, including Nietzsche and Catherine MacKinnon. For critical genealogies can reveal what it is that our representations do and what we in turn might do with them. So the article then moves to discuss Nietzsche and the question of morality, and Catherine MacKinnon and feminist thought. So the ways that we think and the origins of our thought then lead us to action. And there are obviously moral and societal and ethical and political questions about how our thinking then leads to actions with and against and for others. I say somehow because it is not immediately clear just why genealogical revelation should have such an undermining effect. Likewise, it is not immediately clear what might be meant by legitimacy or standing, but what does seem clear is that we humans, at least in some places and at some times, are prone to genealogical anxiety. So when you're reading the text, I think it's good to not just read and think one understands, or to read and memorize, but to read and to consider what ideas you can take away from the articles and what you actually think about what is being said. So Srinivasan writes, it is not immediately clear what might be meant by legitimacy or standing. But what does seem clear is that we humans, at least in some places and at some times, are prone to genealogical anxiety. So I would argue that genealogical anxiety does not arise for everyone at the same time in the same places, and that class often determines an anxiety over origins. So if one was not exposed to, say, books or texts or a certain English language education or any education, would they have this anxiety over belief? And so I would suggest that having this kind of existential anxiety over belief is a function of class position. However, I also think that there are obviously times where genealogical anxiety also does not arise among the most privileged people. So that if you are white and cisgender and Christian and have a great deal of money, despite the passage of new laws, you might still think that your upbringing and your family tutelage is more important than the existence of, say, immigrants and people of color and queer people and transgender people. And you might be allowed to shelter yourself from any kind of critique and from any questioning of the origins of your thinking. At the same time, if you are very poor, then you might be rooted in a certain material reality that does not allow one to question belief. Although I think even among people who are poor or who are prevented from having access to formal education, lived experiences of, say, labor exploitation, rape, war could cause one to question one's beliefs. So even if someone does not have exposure to, say, an English language education or any education, if you live through war, you might question your beliefs in, say, a certain religion or government. And so I still think that even though some would argue that our existential anxieties are determined by class, I actually think that it is the very rich and very privileged who do not have to ever often question one's parental tutelage or one's family upbringing, because if you can afford to shelter yourself from, say, minorities or from political changes, then you could maintain the same set of beliefs and ideas. So the author then goes on to discuss genealogy and morality. So Friedrich Nietzsche is cited in the text, and the author discusses the ways that morality is central to Nietzsche's understanding of genealogy. So Nietzsche makes clear in the Genealogy and elsewhere that modern morality has the effect of controlling and neutering the instincts of higher men, those individuals capable of the grandest reaches of human excellence. So this idea of modern morality and trying to shape belief has a societal function. So it is not only that our sense of morality and our individual belief exists to us alone, or is only something that our closest friends and family are exposed to. The origins of our thoughts and our willingness to act based on these thoughts obviously impact modern morality. And Nietzsche is interested in the ways that having a sense of morals can control people who can then reach heights of human excellence, so that if we have a sense of control over ourselves, we can participate in society and be great achievers and leaders. Nietzsche, moreover, suggests that these effects explain the emergence and continued grip of bourgeois morality. It is thus the hidden function of modern morality to oppress higher men, a function that can only be uncovered through an examination of how that morality emerged, developed, and ascended to dominance. And so the author then cites Nietzsche to discuss the relationship between bourgeois morality and genealogical anxiety, and the ways that modern nation states are grounded in certain thoughts. And this is my interpretation of the text. And I often read philosophy and think about it in very practical terms, in relation to the law and changes in law, and in relation to politics and political governance. So I actually teach political science as well, as classes like Self and Society. So throughout the class, we will look at the ways that our constructions of the self and our relationship to society are always determined by politics. What do our representations do? What practices and forms of life do they help sustain? What sort of person do they help construct, and whose power do they help entrench? So this is where I think the article really looks at power, and throughout the entirety of the text, I think Srinivasan is interested in the ways that thinking is never innocent or neutral, the origins of thought and our own sense of philosophical reasoning is also about power, and what kinds of power structures we end up supporting with our thinking. So if I go back to the original example of someone who was raised in a conservative Christian, cisgender, heteronormative household with strong religious beliefs, what kind of power does this person's thinking help entrench? And if this thinking changes over time, or if this thinking can be expanded to include the existence of, say, transgender persons, then whose power are we helping to entrench, and whose power are we challenging? And I would argue that we do all have the right to private thoughts and private reason. And Immanuel Kant discussed these terms, private reason and public reason. However, I don't think you can draw a clear line between these two sets of ideas. So if we have strong private views against transgender rights, then when we go into public and we see lots of people working who are transgender people, will we behave in ways that are threatening to society and to societal change and the upholding of laws? And I think in many ways, people who refuse to challenge their private beliefs can be a threat to the public. So in the interest of time, I'll just move on. The idea, and there are lots of clips, and this is a clip of Amiya Srinivasan discussing the book that Professor Srinivasan has written, The Right to Sex, which is about the involuntary celibate. The idea that a representation should be thought of in terms of what it does, its function, rather than its epistemic merits, its truth or aptness, has an uneasy place in analytical philosophy or analytic philosophy. Philosophers often see discussions of oppressive function as a kind of historicist non sequitur. The historian observes that a certain representation co-originated with or has consistently gone hand in hand with, and thus plausibly has the function of producing certain patterns of domination. So these ideas, I think, are very different in philosophy and in terms of even everyday thinking. So there's a difference between what we can do with an idea and whether it is true. And people have historically done lots of things with very bad ideas, like Nazism or patriarchy, white supremacy. And so philosophy asks us, particularly in this time period, to consider whether our ideas are true rather than just thinking what we can do with them. So people can hurt other people's feelings or be quite mean with a certain set of ideas that are grounded in some sort of superiority. But is this superiority really true? That is questionable. So Nietzsche is a widely cited philosopher and a very influential philosopher in European philosophy. So Friedrich Nietzsche makes clear in the Genealogy and elsewhere that modern morality has the effect, oh, I already read this. In his relative indifference to the epistemic merits of our representations and concern for their oppressive function, Nietzsche is not only emblematic of a strand of critical genealogical thinking that includes Foucault, but also, I want to suggest, a range of theorists of politics, critics of liberalism such as Charles Mills and Uday Mehta, critics of Eurocentrism such as Edward Said and Chandra Mohanty, feminists such as Simone de Beauvoir, Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, Catherine McKinnon, and Judith Butler, and intellectual historians such as Quentin Skinner and Samuel Moy. The crucial question for such critical genealogists is not, are our representations true? But what do our representations do? What practices and forms of life do they help sustain? And so the essential question then, I guess, or one of the questions that the article asks us, and it's quite dense as an essay. It is a really strong piece of philosophy. So hopefully you can take a few key ideas from it. And I think one of the ideas is to think about the ways that our ideas, where they come from, how they are formed, and what actions we take because of the ideas help to uphold certain structures of power, or they help to question certain structures of power. So that if we have a genuine belief in, say, religion, then the genealogy of this belief, the origins of our belief in certain religions might be because of our parents and our families, our national upbringing. And then these religious beliefs will allow us to take action. When we take action, we are upholding certain structures like the church or like certain institutions of religion. And I think it's interesting to think about how in this time period, are there power structures that we uphold without necessarily wanting to uphold these power structures? Do we think and then act in ways that lead to the upholding of power structures that we no longer believe in? So Srinivasan is then interested in world making and the ways that we can make new worlds based on new ideas and new actions. Reading the genealogy this way is to read it as a guide to what I would call world making, the transformation of the world through a transformation of our representational practices. A critical genealogy is a guide to world making when it is not only diagnosis, of our representations in terms of the oppressive function they serve, but moreover shows us the role that agental powers, individuals, groups, and institutions have played in the emergence and continued dominance of those representations. For then we might be able to exercise our own agental powers to make our representations and thus our world anew. So if we read this passage, then a critical genealogy is a guide to world making when it is not only a diagnosis of our representations in terms of the oppressive role they serve. And so what the author is, I think, saying is that we can continue to think about why our ideas are oppressive. So if we have ideas, say, about gender, where someone believes that because one is born a man, they have certain intellectual capacities or strength of the physical body that one would not have if they were not born a man. We can think about the ways that how we represent these ideas can be oppressive. But the author moves on to then say what is important is to think about the role that agental powers, individuals, groups, institutions have played in the emergence and continued dominance of those representations. So it is not just that we alone believe in these things and, oh, it's wrong that I believe in oppressive ideas, but then I can go further and think about how are these oppressive ideas upheld by certain institutions, groups, individuals, and do I have then the agency to change my thinking? And yes, I have the agency to challenge these institutions, groups, and individuals. I also have the agency to move away from certain institutions, groups, and peoples and to form my new worlds with new friends and new ideas, new influences, and with new texts as well, like the work of Dr. Amiya Srinivasan, whose article I hope that you enjoy. So I'm going to stop there, and when I post the recorded lecture, I will discuss Catherine McKinnon's references in this text in detail. So Srinivasan also discusses Catherine McKinnon's work, and McKinnon's writing is really influential in feminist thought, and I have particularly read writings that Catherine McKinnon has written about the law and feminism. And so I will record a lecture where I specifically discuss McKinnon's writings that are cited by Srinivasan in this article. And I'll post the lecture online as soon as possible when the online modules are available. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that the first article is enjoyable. It can be kind of wordy in terms of undergraduate curriculum. So when and if you decide to go to graduate school, you'll have more time to read articles like Amiya Srinivasan's in detail and to read texts over and over again in small groups. So if you go to a master's program or PhD program, you're often in small groups of, say, 6 people who do a PhD, and you all take turns reading and interpreting the text. But I think the article is a really strong one. It gives you a sense of some of the debates that philosophers are having now about the origins of thought and the ways that our personal and family origins, yes, do shape the ways that we think and believe in things. But no, this does not mean we do not have the agency to choose new influences and to change our beliefs, which would allow us to also participate in a society of changing laws. So that is all. Do you have questions? We're a bit over time. We'll meet again on Thursday. And as I said, hopefully the IT stuff will be sorted out. So the syllabus and all the assignments and the readings will be posted online. So you don't have to really look for anything or do anything as of yet. You just have to wait and I will post everything online. Questions? Okay, this was only the introductory class. I'm sorry for the IT issues. Many people are emailing me, and hopefully everything will be sorted out next week. You won't have to hand anything in until the end. You're welcome. You won't have to hand anything in until the end of January, and it will be a take-home test. So there won't be any surprise quizzes or exams. Okay, thanks a lot. And I will send you a link and we can meet again on Thursday as well. Thank you. Bye.